When a young girl endures hidden abuse and neglect at the hands of her foster parents, they believe their cruelty will remain buried beneath their carefully crafted facade. But they're dead wrong. A determined teacher steps in, exposing their lies and deception. This is a story of resilience, courage, and the relentless pursuit of justice for a child who refuses to be silenced. Before we dive into the story, let us know where you're watching from and if you stand for justice. Be sure to like and subscribe for more. Emma's pencil froze mid-doodle as the classroom door creaked open. All heads turned. Miss Hayes, the principal, stood in the doorway, her expression unreadable. Emma's stomach tightened. She rarely showed up unannounced, and when she did, it was never good news. "Emma, I need to see you," she said, her voice calm but clipped. The room went silent. The other kids exchanged glances, a few smirks spreading across faces. Emma's heart raced as she slid her notebook into her backpack. She avoided the stairs and shuffled past her classmates, each step feeling heavier than the last. Her mind raced through everything she could have done wrong. Was it the forgotten homework? Did someone complain about her? Miss Hayes didn't say much as they walked down the hallway, her heels clicking sharply against the tile, each step echoing in the otherwise empty corridor. Emma trailed behind, her palms damp. The principal's office door loomed ahead, its frosted glass catching the afternoon light. When Miss Hayes opened the door, Emma hesitated on the threshold. Her foster parents, Carl and Linda Miller, were sitting stiffly inside. Carl's hands rested on his knees, his jaw tight. Linda clutched her purse with both hands, her lips pressed into a strange smile. Emma's pulse quickened. They never came to school. Why were they here? "Come in, Emma," Miss Hayes said, motioning toward the empty chair beside Carl and Linda. She sat down slowly, her legs barely reaching the floor. The air in the room felt thick, suffocating. Miss Hayes closed the door and took her seat behind the desk, folding her hands neatly. She looked at Emma with practiced warmth, but there was something else in her gaze, concern, maybe even suspicion. "Emma, I wanted to speak with you because one of your teachers, Miss Roberts, has expressed some concerns about you." Emma's chest tightened. Concerns? What kind of concerns? Her eyes flicked to Carl, who was staring straight ahead, his expression carved in stone. Linda's fake smile remained, but her knuckles had gone white from gripping her purse. Emma couldn't bring herself to meet Miss Hayes' gaze. She mentioned a few things, some bruises, your withdrawn behavior. She's worried that you might be having a hard time at home. "Is there anything you'd like to tell me?" Miss Hayes' tone was soft, inviting, too inviting. Emma's throat felt like sandpaper. She opened her mouth, but the words wouldn't come. Carl shifted in his chair, and Emma caught the slight narrowing of his eyes, a warning. Linda reached out and rested a hand on Carl's arm, a small gesture but one that screamed, "Stay in line." "I'm fine," Emma finally choked, her voice barely above a whisper. Miss Hayes tilted her head slightly as if to encourage her. "Emma, it's okay if there's something wrong. You can tell me. We just want to make sure you're safe." Carl cleared his throat, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "Miss Hayes, I understand your concern, but Emma's been through a lot. Adjusting to a new home is always difficult, and we're doing everything we can to support her." Linda nodded quickly, her tone syrupy sweet. "Oh yes, Emma's a wonderful girl, but she's still learning to trust us. These transitions can take time, can't they, sweetheart?" She turned to Emma, her smile tightening. The word "sweetheart" felt like a knife in her chest. Emma forced herself to nod, her hands clenched into fists in her lap. She didn't dare say otherwise. Miss Hayes glanced between them, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Emma, do you feel safe at home?" Carl's jaw twitched. Emma felt his gaze burn into the side of her face. She stared at the floor, her voice small. "Yes." The room fell silent. Miss Hayes leaned back in her chair, watching them closely. Finally, she exhaled and said, "All right, but Emma, I want you to know that if you ever need to talk, my door is always open. Don't hesitate, okay?" Emma nodded again, but the lump in her throat made it impossible to speak. As they left the office, Carl placed a hand on Emma's shoulder, his grip firm. He leaned down, his voice low and cold. "We'll talk about this later," he muttered, his fingers digging into Emma's shoulder like claws. That night, Emma sat in her room, staring at the crack under her door where light spilled in from the hallway. She could hear Carl and Linda's voices drifting up from the kitchen, their argument loud and bitter. "You're spending too much, Carl. We're barely making ends meet," Linda snapped. "Oh, don't start with that again," Carl shot back, his voice dripping with irritation. "We're fine as long as we've got the girl. The stipends will keep coming. What's your problem?" "It's not about the money," Linda hissed. "It's about her. She's going to cause us trouble if we're not careful. Did you see the way that principal was looking at us? Carl let out a sharp laugh. Let them look. No one's going to believe some foster kid over us. We're the perfect family, remember? Emma's hands trembled as she clutched the photo of her biological family she kept hidden under her mattress. It was faded, the edges torn, but it was the only thing she had left of her real home. She stared at her mother's smiling face, at the strong hand of her father holding her as a baby. I miss you, she whispered, tears stinging her eyes. She let herself wonder, was staying silent really the safest choice? The bell rang, marking the start of a new school day, but Miss Roberts couldn't shake the unease from the day before. The brief meeting in the principal's office lingered in her mind. The tension in Emma's shoulders, the way her foster parents had expertly deflected every concern, hadn't sat right with her then, and it still didn't now. Emma arrived late to class that morning, quietly slipping into her seat in the back. Her hair was unkempt, and her shirt looked slightly wrinkled as though she'd thrown it on in a rush. Miss Roberts noticed the dark circles under her eyes. She didn't look up as she began the lesson. All right, let's pick up where we left off yesterday, she said. Walking around the room as the students worked, Miss Roberts glanced at Emma. Her pencil moved slowly across the paper, her gaze fixed downward. Something was off. She could feel it. When the students were dismissed for recess, Miss Roberts called Emma over. Hey, Emma, can you stay back for a minute? I need to talk to you. She hesitated, then nodded and shuffled to her desk, standing awkwardly, fidgeting with the strap of her backpack. How are you doing today? She asked, her tone light but genuine. I'm fine, Emma said quickly, too quickly. Miss Roberts folded her hands on the desk, softening her voice. Emma, if there's anything bothering you, you know you can talk to me, right? I'm here to help. She nodded again, but her silence spoke volumes. Her eyes darted toward the door as if calculating how quickly she could leave. Miss Roberts decided not to push her further. All right, you can head to recess, she said, offering a small smile. But remember, my door is always open. Thanks, Emma mumbled, hurrying out of the room. That afternoon, Miss Roberts sat in the teacher's lounge during lunch, her notebook open in front of her. She had started jotting down observations about Emma, piecing together the small details that had unsettled her. She listed the things she had noticed over the past few months. Emma's reluctance to participate in class activities, her habit of sitting alone during group work, and the worn-out clothes she often wore. Then there were the times she had come to school late or seemed exhausted, and the troubling comment she had made once about her parents not liking to waste money on food. Emma's been on your mind a lot lately, hasn't she? Asked Mrs. Alvarez, a colleague who taught math, as she sipped her coffee. Miss Roberts hesitated, then nodded. Yeah, I feel like something's not right. Have you noticed anything? Mrs. Alvarez leaned back in her chair, thinking. She's always so quiet in my class. Doesn't really speak up unless I call on her. I've noticed she looks a little tired sometimes, but I figured it was just normal middle school stuff. What about breakfast? Miss Roberts pressed. Has she ever come to your first period class hungry? Mrs. Alvarez frowned. Now that you mention it, yes. There have been a few mornings when she seemed out of it. She doesn't eat breakfast in the cafeteria either. She just sits there during free period. Miss Roberts made a note in her notebook, her gut telling her she was on the right track. Thanks, Mrs. Alvarez. That helps. As the lunch period ended, Miss Roberts resolved to keep a closer eye on Emma, but she knew she'd need more than just observations to take action. At dismissal that day, Miss Roberts stayed near the front entrance, watching the students leave. She spotted Emma standing near the gate, her backpack slung low over one shoulder, her posture slouched, her gaze fixed on the ground. A moment later, a sleek black sedan pulled up, and Carl stepped out, dressed sharply in a button-down shirt and slacks, his polished shoes catching the light. Hey there, princess. Carl called out, his voice warm and cheerful. Emma flinched slightly but walked over to the car without a word. Miss Roberts noticed how she kept her head down, avoiding Carl's gaze. As Carl placed a hand on Emma's shoulder, something about the gesture seemed off, too firm, too controlling. Miss Roberts's eyes narrowed. Carl's demeanor felt overly rehearsed, as though he was performing for anyone who might be watching. Emma climbed into the passenger seat, and Carl gave a quick glance around before getting in himself. The car pulled away, leaving Miss Roberts standing there, her unease growing. That evening, back in her quiet apartment, Miss Roberts sat at her desk with her notebook open again. She wrote down everything she had seen that day, Emma's late arrival, her withdrawn behavior, and the interaction with Carl at dismissal. Her pen hovered for a moment before she wrote. Emma avoided looking at Carl. Tense body language. Carl's tone felt performative. She leaned back in her chair, staring at the notes. It was a lot of small pieces, but together they painted a troubling picture. She thought about going straight to the school counselor with what she had, but she knew that without concrete evidence, Carl and Linda would likely talk their way out of it again. Their charm and polished facade were hard to break through. Her thoughts wandered to Emma, and a pang of guilt hit her. If she waited too long to act, what might happen to her? But if she acted without enough proof, would anyone believe her? Or worse, would it make things harder for Emma? Miss Roberts sighed and closed the notebook, her resolve firming. Tomorrow she would start paying even closer attention. She couldn't let this go unnoticed any longer. Do you think Emma should speak out about her foster parents' neglect and abuse? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Will anyone believe her, or will Carl and Linda's lies keep the truth buried? Don't forget to like this video if you're eager to find out, and stay tuned to see if Miss Roberts can uncover the truth before it's too late. Emma sat at her usual spot near the corner of the room, away from the commotion, nibbling on a plain sandwich she'd hastily packed that morning. The cafeteria was buzzing with the usual midday chaos. Students laughing, trays clattering, conversations overlapping into a dull roar. Her math homework lay open beside her, the pencil resting lightly in her hand. She wasn't really working on it, though. She was just trying to look busy. Mind if I sit here? The voice startled her. Emma glanced up to see a girl around her age standing across the table. She had an easy smile and a sharpness in her eyes that gave off a mix of confidence and mischief. Emma shrugged, lowering her gaze back to her homework. Sure. The girl plopped her tray onto the table, sitting down with an exaggerated sigh. Man, this school is wild. I've only been here 2 days and I've already seen 3 fights and 1 kid fall asleep during gym. You guys don't mess around, huh? Emma didn't respond, unsure of what to say. I'm Nora, by the way, the girl continued, unfazed by Emma's silence. She took a bite of her pizza and gestured toward Emma's homework. You're working on math during lunch? You're making the rest of us look bad, man. Emma finally allowed a small smile to creep onto her face, though she didn't look up. It's due next period. Fair enough, Nora said, leaning back in her chair. So, you always sit alone, or am I just interrupting alone time? Emma hesitated, then shrugged. I just like the quiet. Nora nodded thoughtfully, as if filing that piece of information away. Cool. Quiet's good. She paused for a moment before adding, I'm new here, so I'm still figuring out who's who. You seem chill though. Mind if I eat lunch here again tomorrow? Emma blinked, caught off guard by the question. Most people didn't ask. They either ignored her completely or made her the butt of some joke. Sure, she mumbled. Sweet, Nora said, grinning. Looks like I found my lunch buddy. Over the next few days, Nora stuck to her word, showing up at Emma's table every lunch period, chatting away about everything and nothing. Emma didn't say much, but Nora didn't seem to mind. She filled the silences with stories about her old school, her favorite movies, and her general dislike for cafeteria food. One day during gym class they were paired together for a basketball drill. Emma moved clumsily on the court, clearly uncomfortable, while Nora bounced the ball effortlessly between her hands. At one point, Nora reached out to pass the ball to Emma, and her gaze landed on Emma's wrist. Hey, Nora said, frowning. What happened there? Emma glanced down, realizing too late that her sleeve had ridden up, exposing a faint purple bruise just above her wrist. She quickly tugged the fabric down, shaking her head. Nothing. I just banged it on something. Nora raised an eyebrow, her expression skeptical. Sure, it's nothing. It is, Emma insisted, turning away and grabbing the ball. Nora didn't press further, but her curiosity was piqued. She'd seen that look before, the quick deflection, the unwillingness to talk about it. It reminded her of kids she'd known in her previous foster homes, kids who carried secrets they were too scared to share. Later that afternoon, the two of them walked home together, the sun low in the sky, casting long shadows across the sidewalk. Nora tossed her backpack over one shoulder, keeping pace with Emma. So, you're not really a talker, huh? Nora said after a while. Emma shrugged. I just don't have much to say. Nora smirked. That's cool. I talk enough for both of us anyway. They walked in silence for a few minutes before Nora spoke again, her tone more serious. You know, I used to be in foster care too. Emma glanced at her, surprised. Yeah, Nora said, kicking a loose pebble down the sidewalk. I've had my share of bad homes. Not all of them, but a couple. There was this one family, they were all smiles in public, but behind closed doors? Total nightmare. Emma kept her eyes forward, but her grip on her backpack straps tightened. I didn't think anyone would believe me, Nora continued. I mean, who's going to listen to some foster kid, right? That's what I told myself. But then one of my teachers noticed something was up, kind of like your Miss Roberts. She talked to me and I finally told her everything. Scared the hell out of me, but it was the best thing I ever did. Emma didn't respond, but Nora could tell she was listening. Look, I'm not saying your situation is the same, Nora added quickly. I'm just saying there are people who care, teachers, social workers, friends. You don't have to keep everything to yourself, you know? Emma's jaw clenched and she shook her head. You don't get it. Carl and Linda, they're good at making people believe what they want them to believe. No one's going to take my side. I do get it, Nora said. I've been there. But you're not alone in this. If you need someone to talk to, I'm here, okay? And if you ever want to tell Miss Roberts or someone else, I'll back you up. Emma hesitated, fear and doubt warring inside her. The idea of speaking up still terrified her. For now, she said quietly, I'm not ready. Nora nodded. That's okay. I'll be here when you are. For the first time in what felt like forever, Emma felt a small glimmer of hope flicker inside her. That evening, Emma sat on her bed, replaying Nora's words in her head. She reached for the photo of her biological family under her pillow, running her fingers over the worn edges. Maybe Nora was right. Maybe there were people who cared. But the idea of speaking up still terrified her. For now, she decided she'd take it one day at a time. At least she had someone in her corner. The dinner table was quiet that evening, apart from the soft clinking of silverware against plates. Emma sat in her usual spot, keeping her head down, cautiously eating the overcooked chicken Linda had made. Carl sat at the head of the table, scrolling through his phone, barely paying attention to anyone. Linda was fussing over the state of the house, muttering to herself about needing to clean up after dinner. Emma, when you're done eating, I want you to clear the table and wipe down the counters, Linda said curtly, her tone sharp and businesslike. Yes, ma'am, Emma replied quietly, barely lifting her head. As soon as the plates were cleared, Linda and Carl moved to the living room, leaving Emma alone in the kitchen. She carefully stacked the dishes in the sink, taking extra care not to make a sound. Her hands moved with practiced precision, scrubbing and rinsing, while her mind wandered to Nora's words from earlier that day. There are people who care. You don't have to keep everything to yourself. The thought felt distant, almost impossible. She reached for the cloth to wipe down the counter, but her elbow accidentally bumped into a small vase perched precariously on the edge. The sound of shattering ceramic filled the room. Emma froze, her stomach dropping as she stared at the broken pieces scattered on the floor. What was that? Carl's voice boomed from the living room. Emma scrambled to pick up the pieces, her hands trembling. Before she could gather them, Carl stormed into the kitchen, followed closely by Linda. Carl's face darkened the moment he saw the mess. Are you kidding me? Carl barked, his voice echoing off the walls. Do you have any idea how much that vase cost? I'm sorry, Emma stammered, her voice barely audible. She kept her eyes on the floor, her hands clutching the larger pieces of the shattered vase. Sorry doesn't fix it, does it? Carl yelled, his anger boiling over. You're nothing but a clumsy useless. Carl, Linda interrupted, stepping forward with her hands raised. It's just a vase. Let it go. Let it go. Carl snapped, turning to her. Do you realize the stress I'm under? And now this little brat can't even manage basic chores without screwing up. Linda hesitated, glancing at Emma. For a brief moment, it looked like she might defend her, but then her expression hardened. Emma, you need to be more careful. We don't have time for your mistakes. Emma opened her mouth to apologize again, but before she could speak, Carl grabbed her arm, yanking her upright. The sharp grip sent a jolt of pain up Emma's arm and she winced. You better shape up, girl, Carl growled, his face inches from Emma's. Because if you mess up like this again, there will be real consequences. Do you hear me? Emma nodded quickly, her heart pounding. Carl released her with a shove, and Emma stumbled back, clutching her arm. Without another word, Carl turned and stormed out of the kitchen, Linda following close behind. Emma retreated to her room, closing the door quietly behind her. She sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the faint red mark Carl's hand had left on her arm. Her chest tightened, and the tears she'd been holding back all evening finally spilled over. She reached under her pillow and pulled out the torn photo of her biological family, the edges frayed and a small rip running through the middle. It was still the most precious thing she owned. She traced her finger over her mother's smiling face, then her father's strong, reassuring presence in the background. Why can't I just be with you? She whispered, her voice cracking. The tears came harder now, her body trembling with the weight of it all. As the night wore on, Emma lay on her bed, staring at the ceiling. Her mind raced, replaying the scene in the kitchen over and over. Just as she was beginning to drift off, faint voices from the living room caught her attention. She sat up, her heart pounding as she quietly crept to her door, pressing her ear against it. Carl's voice was low but filled with smugness. "Yeah, it's easy money. You just play the part, keep the kid in line, and the checks keep rolling in. It's not rocket science." Emma's blood ran cold. She could hear Linda chime in, her voice quieter. "We can't have another visit from the school. You need to make sure she keeps her mouth shut." Emma backed away from the door, her breathing uneven. She crawled back into bed, pulling the blanket tightly around her. The words echoed in her head louder than anything else. "No one will believe a foster kid." The next morning, Emma arrived at school, her body heavy with exhaustion. She barely made it through her classes, her mind consumed by the events of the night before. When the lunch bell rang, she found Nora waiting for her at their usual spot in the cafeteria. "Hey," Nora said, her grin fading the moment she saw Emma's face. "You okay?" Emma hesitated, then shook her head. "No, I'm not." Nora's brows furrowed. "What happened?" Emma glanced around, making sure no one else was listening. She lowered her voice. "Last night Carl got mad. He grabbed me, yelled at me, and then I heard him talking to Linda about how they're just using me for money. They don't care about me. They just—" Her voice broke and she looked away. Nora's jaw tightened, her usual lightheartedness replaced by a fierce determination. "Emma, you have to tell someone. Miss Roberts, the school counselor, anyone. You can't keep this to yourself." Emma shook her head quickly. "I can't. They'll just lie their way out of it. Carl said no one would believe me." "That's bull," Nora said firmly. "Miss Roberts already knows something's up. You tell her what you just told me and she'll do something about it." Emma hesitated, fear and doubt warring inside her. "What if it just makes everything worse?" "It won't," Nora said, her voice steady. "But staying quiet will. You deserve better than this, Emma." Emma stared at the table, her eyes stinging. Nora's words sank in, and after a long pause she gave a small nod. "Okay. I'll talk to her." Nora smiled, clapping her on the shoulder. "You're doing the right thing, man. I'll be here no matter what." That afternoon, Emma walked to Miss Roberts's classroom, her heart pounding. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew one thing: she couldn't stay silent anymore. The school hallways were nearly empty, echoing with the faint sounds of distant conversations as Emma walked toward Miss Roberts's classroom. Her palms were sweaty, her heart pounding with each step. She clutched her backpack tightly, her thoughts racing. Doubts clouded her mind. What if she doesn't believe me? What if this makes everything worse? When she reached her door, she hesitated. Inside, Miss Roberts was sitting at her desk, sorting through a stack of papers. She looked calm, focused, completely unaware of the storm raging inside Emma. Gathering every ounce of courage she could muster, she knocked lightly on the door frame. Miss Roberts looked up and smiled gently. "Emma, come in. What's on your mind?" Emma stepped inside, her movements stiff and uncertain. She glanced around the room as if checking to make sure they were alone, then shifted her weight from one foot to the other. I need to talk to you," she said, her voice barely audible. Miss Roberts gestured to a chair across from her desk. Emma sat down, her hands twisting the strap of her backpack. For a moment she couldn't bring herself to speak. The words were trapped in her throat, weighed down by fear. "It's okay," Miss Roberts said softly, leaning forward slightly. "You can take your time. Whatever it is, I'm here to listen." Emma nodded, swallowing hard. "It's about Carl and Linda," she began, her voice shaky. They're not who they seem to be. At home it's not like how they act here." Miss Roberts tilted her head, her expression encouraging but concerned. "What do you mean?" "They're different when no one's around," Emma said, her words tumbling out in a rush. "They yell a lot. Carl, he grabbed my arm last night because I broke something, and he said if I mess up again, there'll be real consequences." She paused, her breath hitching. Miss Roberts waited patiently, letting her gather her thoughts. "They're always so nice when people are watching," Emma continued, "but when we're at home it's like they don't care. Carl just talks about money all the time, and last night I heard him on the phone, laughing about how easy it is to get foster care money. He said no one would believe a kid like me." Miss Roberts's face softened, her concern deepening. "Emma, I'm so sorry you've been dealing with this," she said gently. "You don't deserve to be treated that way." Emma hesitated, then pushed up her sleeve, revealing the faint red mark Carl had left on her arm. "This is from last night," she said quietly. Miss Roberts's expression darkened. "Does this happen often?" She nodded reluctantly. "Sometimes. Not always like this, but they're always yelling, always blaming me for stuff, and they make me feel like I'm nothing." Miss Roberts took a deep breath, trying to keep her own emotions in check. "Emma, thank you for telling me this. I know it wasn't easy, but I'm glad you trusted me enough to share." Emma looked down, her hands twisting the strap of her backpack again. I don't have any proof though," she muttered. Just what I remember and what I heard." Miss Roberts leaned forward. "Your words matter, Emma. What you've told me is important, and I'm going to make sure this is taken seriously. You don't have to do this alone, okay?" Emma's shoulders sagged slightly, some of the tension easing from her body. "Okay," she whispered. The next morning, Miss Roberts went straight to the school counselor, sharing everything Emma had told her. The counselor immediately contacted Emma's caseworker, scheduling a home visit for later that afternoon. Miss Roberts hoped this would finally be the start of change for Emma, but she couldn't shake the worry gnawing at her. By the time the caseworker arrived at Carl and Linda's house, the couple was ready. The living room was spotless, every surface gleaming, and Emma sat on the couch, her face carefully blank. Carl greeted the caseworker with a warm smile, shaking her hand firmly. "Thank you for coming," Carl said, his voice dripping with sincerity. "We've been so worried about Emma. She's been having a hard time adjusting, but we're doing our best to support her." Linda chimed in, her tone saccharine and sweet. "Oh yes, Emma's a wonderful girl, but she's been through so much. It breaks my heart to see her struggle." The caseworker asked a few questions, but Carl and Linda deflected each one with ease, painting a picture of themselves as patient, devoted foster parents. When the caseworker turned to Emma and asked if she felt safe at home, Carl's eyes flicked toward her, a subtle but unmistakable warning. "Yes," Emma said quietly, her hands gripping the couch cushions. The caseworker nodded, making a few notes in her file. She stayed for another 15 minutes before thanking Carl and Linda for their time and leaving. As soon as the door closed, Carl's smile vanished. He turned to Emma, his face hard and cold. "What did you tell her?" "Nothing," Emma said quickly. "I didn't say anything." "You better not have," Carl growled. "You think you're smart, trying to make us look bad? You're lucky we even let you stay here. You're nothing without us. Do you understand?" Emma nodded, her chest tightening. She fled to her room, closing the door behind her. Her hands shook as she sat on her bed, staring at the floor. The next day, Miss Roberts noticed Emma's pale face and downcast eyes during lunch. She pulled her aside. "How did the visit go?" she asked gently. Emma hesitated, then whispered, "They didn't believe me." Carl and Linda made it look like everything was fine. Miss Roberts's jaw tightened, but she kept her voice steady. "Emma, don't let this discourage you. The truth has a way of coming out, and I'm not giving up on you. We'll figure this out together." Emma looked at her, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and hope. She didn't know what the future held, but for now Miss Roberts's reassurance was enough to keep her going. The atmosphere in Carl and Linda's house shifted the day after the caseworker visit. Emma could feel it as soon as she woke up. The usual sharp commands and passive-aggressive remarks were replaced by an eerie quietness, almost as if they were waiting for something to happen. Downstairs, Carl and Linda sat at the dining table, speaking in low voices. Emma hesitated at the top of the stairs, catching snippets of their conversation. "They're watching us now," Linda muttered, her tone tense. "We can't have another visit like that. That girl is going to ruin everything." "Let them watch," Carl said, his voice colder, more calculating. "We'll handle this like we always do, control the narrative. I've already made a call to the lawyer. He's drafting a letter to the caseworker, framing this as a classic case of a troubled kid acting out. Emotional instability, behavioral issues, you name it. It'll discredit anything she tries to say." Emma's heart sank. She quietly stepped back into her room, closing the door. She knew they were already spinning their web, turning her into the villain before she even had a chance to speak. Over the next few days, Carl and Linda went into full damage control mode. Carl spent hours on the phone, contacting neighbors, church members, and anyone else in the community who might vouch for them. He painted a picture of a loving couple taking in a difficult foster child, emphasizing their patience and generosity. "Emma's been through a lot," Carl would say, his voice dripping with faux concern. "We're doing everything we can for her, but she's struggling. We just want to make sure she gets the help she needs." Linda, meanwhile, played her part perfectly. In public, she became overly affectionate toward Emma, patting her shoulder and calling her sweetheart whenever they were around other people. At school drop-offs, she smiled warmly at teachers and even brought cookies to Emma's class, earning praise from staff and parents alike. But behind closed doors their true colors showed. Carl's cold demeanor became even harsher, and Linda's sugary sweetness turned to icy indifference. They revoked Emma's privileges, taking away her access to TV and limiting her meals to the bare minimum. She wasn't allowed to leave her room unless it was for school or chores. They even began monitoring her every move, checking her backpack and pockets when she came home and confiscating anything they deemed suspicious. One evening, Carl barged into Emma's room unannounced, rummaging through her drawers and closet. "What are you doing?" Emma asked, her voice trembling. "Making sure you're not hiding anything," Carl snapped, throwing clothes onto the floor as he searched. When he found nothing, he left with a warning. "Don't even think about trying to pull something stupid." Emma sat on her bed, staring at the mess Carl had left behind. The walls of her small room felt like they were closing in, suffocating her. She clutched the torn photo of her biological family, the only thing they hadn't found yet, and wondered how much longer she could endure this. The manipulation extended beyond the house. Carl tracked down Nora's parents, showing up at their door one evening. Emma didn't know what was said, but the next day, Nora told her about the encounter during lunch. "My dad said Carl came over last night," Nora said, frowning. "He told my parents you're making stuff up and that you're a troublemaker. He said you've been lying about them and trying to cause problems." Emma's stomach dropped. "What did your parents say?" "They don't believe him," Nora said firmly. "I told them what I've seen and they're on your side. But Emma, you have to be careful. Carl's trying to isolate you. He doesn't want anyone helping you." Emma nodded, her throat tightening. "I already feel isolated," she admitted. "Every time I try to fight back, they just make things worse." Nora placed a hand on Emma's shoulder. "That's what they want. They're trying to scare you into silence. But you can't let them win. Miss Roberts is still fighting for you, right?" Emma nodded again, but her confidence was shaky. What if it's not enough? What if no one believes her either? "They will," Nora said, her voice steady. "But you have to hang in there. You're not alone in this." Despite Nora's reassurance, the psychological toll on Emma deepened each day. School felt like a brief escape, but the moment she stepped back into Carl and Linda's house, the weight returned. She became quieter, more withdrawn, retreating further into herself. Miss Roberts noticed the change immediately. She pulled Emma aside after class one day, her concern evident. "Emma, you seem different lately. Is everything okay?" Emma hesitated, then shook her head. "They're watching me," she whispered. "They're trying to make me look like a liar." Miss Roberts's jaw tightened, but she kept her voice calm. "I know it feels that way, Emma, but the truth has a way of coming out. You've already taken the hardest step by speaking up. Don't lose hope, okay?" Emma looked at her, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and hope. She didn't know what the future held, but Miss Roberts's reassurance was enough to keep her going. The idea started as a small spark, ignited by Miss Roberts's and Nora's unwavering support. Emma couldn't rely on her words alone. Carl and Linda were too good at twisting the truth. If she wanted to expose them, she needed proof, real, undeniable proof. Sitting in the quiet of Miss Roberts's classroom after school one day, Emma finally voiced her plan. "I need to show people what they're really like," she said, her voice hesitant but determined. "If I don't, no one will believe me." Miss Roberts leaned forward, her eyes filled with concern. "That's a big step, Emma. It's risky. But if you're careful, it could make a difference. Are you sure you're ready for this?" Emma nodded, though her stomach twisted with nerves. "I have to try." The first step was figuring out how to gather the evidence. Emma dug out her old phone, the one Carl had taken away months ago, and hid it in the bottom of her closet. It was a little outdated, but the camera still worked and the microphone was sensitive enough to pick up sound from across the room. She decided to start small, recording Carl's outbursts when he thought no one was watching. That night, after dinner, Emma positioned the phone on a shelf in her room, partially hidden behind a stack of books. She didn't have to wait long. As she sat on her bed, pretending to do homework, Carl barged in, his face twisted with frustration. "Why are the dishes still in the sink, Emma?" Carl demanded, his voice booming. "I told you to clean them after dinner." "I was about to do them," Emma stammered, her hands trembling. Carl took a step closer, his voice dropping into a cold, threatening tone. "Don't give me excuses, girl. You think you can just slack off and do whatever you want? Not in this house." Emma nodded quickly, keeping her head down while the phone silently recorded every word. Over the next few days, Emma became more confident in her efforts. She began taking photos of the bruises on her arms, carefully documenting the evidence before the marks faded. Each time she made sure to hide the phone securely, knowing that if Carl or Linda found it, everything would fall apart. Nora was her partner in this covert operation. The two of them would meet during lunch, huddling in a quiet corner of the schoolyard to discuss their progress. "How's it going?" Nora asked one afternoon, her voice low. "I've got a few recordings and some pictures," Emma said, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "But it's not enough. I need something bigger." Nora nodded thoughtfully. "What about their finances? Didn't you say Carl talks about money all the time?" Emma frowned, the idea taking shape in her mind. "He has an office at home where he keeps all his paperwork. Maybe I could look there." "That could work," Nora said. "But be careful. If they catch you." "They won't," Emma interrupted, more to convince herself than Nora. "I'll be careful." That evening, while Linda was cooking dinner and Carl was in the living room watching TV, Emma slipped into Carl's office. The room smelled faintly of old coffee and leather, and the desk was cluttered with papers and receipts. Emma's heart pounded as she sifted through the mess, scanning for anything that looked important. After a few minutes, she found what she was looking for, a folder labeled Finances. She opened it and froze. Inside were bank statements and invoices detailing how Carl and Linda had been using their foster care stipend. Luxury clothing, expensive dinners, and even a recent weekend getaway, all paid for with money meant to care for Emma. Emma quickly pulled out her phone and began snapping photos of the documents, her hands shaking. Just as she finished, she heard footsteps approaching the office. Her breath caught in her throat. Carl's voice was getting louder, the sound of his boots growing closer. Panicking, Emma shoved the folder back into the drawer and slid under the desk, clutching her phone tightly. The door creaked open and Carl stepped inside, muttering to himself as he grabbed a pen from the desk. He lingered for a moment, glancing around the room before finally leaving. Emma waited until the footsteps faded completely before crawling out from under the desk, her legs trembling as she slipped out of the office and back to her room. She couldn't believe how close she'd come to being caught. The next day at school, Emma shared the photos with Miss Roberts. She studied them carefully, her expression grave. "This is good, Emma. This is exactly the kind of proof we need. But it's still risky. Are you okay?" Emma nodded, though she looked exhausted. "I'm fine. Just tired." Miss Roberts gave her a small smile. "You're doing an incredible job. I'll take these to the school counselor and add them to the report." Meanwhile, Miss Roberts continued gathering evidence on her end. She interviewed Nora, who recounted the times she had witnessed Carl's aggressive behavior. She also spoke to other teachers, documenting their observations about Emma's withdrawn demeanor and the bruises they'd noticed. Slowly but surely, a fuller picture of Carl and Linda's behavior began to take shape. Back at home, however, Carl was growing suspicious. He started checking Emma's room more frequently, searching for anything that might incriminate him. One evening he found Emma's backpack lying open on the floor and rifled through it, coming up empty. Still, his paranoia grew. "You've been acting weird lately," Carl said over dinner one night, his eyes narrowing at Emma. "If you're up to something, you'd better stop." "I'm not playing games." Emma kept her head down, silently eating her meal. She could feel Linda's gaze on her as well, her smile faint but menacing. The constant surveillance and hostility at home took a toll on Emma. She began to second-guess herself, wondering if all her efforts would even make a difference. But every time she felt like giving up, she thought of Nora and Miss Roberts, their unwavering belief in her keeping her going. One afternoon, as Emma and Nora sat in the schoolyard, Nora gave her a firm pat on the shoulder. "You're doing great. They're scared, and that's a good thing. It means they know you're on to them." Emma gave a small nod, though her chest felt heavy. "I just want this to be over." "It will be," Nora said confidently. "Soon." Together, Emma and Miss Roberts prepared their findings, knowing they were walking a dangerous line. The hostility from Carl and Linda was growing, but so was the strength of their case. They weren't just building evidence, they were building hope. The tension in Emma's life reached a boiling point after weeks of gathering evidence. The photos of bruises, the recordings of Carl's verbal outbursts, and the financial documents that Miss Roberts had compiled with Emma's help painted a damning picture of Carl and Linda's neglect and manipulation. Miss Roberts had taken everything to the school counselor, who promptly escalated the matter to Emma's caseworker. Unlike before, this time the evidence couldn't be ignored. Emma's caseworker, accompanied by a legal representative from the Child Welfare Agency, scheduled an emergency meeting with Carl and Linda. The meeting was tense, with Carl playing the role of the victimized parent, decrying Emma's ungratefulness and emotional instability. Linda chimed in, feigning tears and claiming they had done everything possible to help Emma adjust. But the evidence was irrefutable. The caseworker, flipping through the financial documents and listening to excerpts of the recordings, began to piece together the true nature of the household. When pressed, Carl's facade began to crack, his answers growing defensive and angry. Linda's performance, too, faltered under scrutiny. The result of the meeting was swift and decisive. The agency decided to pursue an emergency custody hearing to determine Emma's placement. The caseworker informed Carl and Linda that their status as foster parents was under review and that the court would decide Emma's future. When Emma heard the news, her emotions were mixed. Relief at the prospect of escaping Carl and Linda clashed with the fear of facing them in court. Miss Roberts reassured her that she would be by her side, as would Nora, who promised to testify about what she had seen. With the date of the hearing set, Emma braced herself for the next fight in her journey toward freedom. The courtroom was uncomfortably quiet as Emma sat in a hard wooden chair near the front, her legs barely brushing the floor. She shifted nervously, tugging at the sleeves of her ill-fitting sweater. The tall ceiling, the polished benches, and the solemn faces of the judge and attorneys made the room feel impossibly large. Beside her sat Miss Roberts, her hand resting gently on her shoulder, and on the other side, Nora gave her an encouraging nod. Carl and Linda were seated across the room, impeccably dressed and oozing false sincerity. Their lawyer, a sharply dressed man with a slick demeanor, was already making his opening statement. My clients, Carl and Linda Miller, have gone above and beyond to provide a stable, loving home for Emma, the lawyer began, gesturing toward them. Raising a foster child, especially one with a troubled past, is no easy task, yet they've met every challenge with patience and kindness. Emma gripped the edge of her chair, her stomach churning as Carl offered the judge a humble, almost saintly smile. Linda dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, perfectly playing the part of a heartbroken mother. The lawyer continued. Unfortunately, children who have experienced trauma can sometimes act out, and in this case, Emma has misinterpreted strict discipline as something far worse. My clients have done nothing but love and support her. Emma's heart sank. The judge, a stern-looking woman with sharp features and kind eyes, nodded thoughtfully, her expression unreadable. Carl took the stand next, adjusting his tie and clearing his throat as if preparing for a performance. He looked straight at the judge, his voice cracking as he began to speak. Your Honor, taking Emma into our home was the best decision we ever made, Carl said, his tone heavy with practiced emotion. She's been through so much and we've tried to give her the stability she needs. But it hasn't been easy. She struggles with trust and sometimes that comes out as defiance. He paused, glancing at the courtroom with watery eyes. We've sacrificed so much for her, our time, our resources, because we love her. And it hurts to think she might not feel the same. Emma's fists clenched under the table. She wanted to scream that it was all a lie, but fear kept her voice locked inside. Carl's lawyer smiled smugly, clearly pleased with the performance. Linda took the stand next, her voice trembling as she spoke. Emma is like a daughter to us, she said, her hands clutching the tissue as if it were a lifeline. We've done everything we can to make her feel at home, but it's been hard to break through her walls. All we want is what's best for her. The judge nodded again, her pen moving across a notepad. Emma felt like the walls were closing in. They were so convincing, so polished. How could she ever make anyone believe the truth? Finally it was Emma's turn. Her name was called, and Miss Roberts gave her shoulder a reassuring squeeze. You've got this, she whispered. Emma rose slowly, her legs trembling as she walked to the stand. She climbed onto the chair, her small frame dwarfed by the imposing witness box. She glanced at the judge, then at Carl and Linda, who were staring at her with cold, expectant expressions. The judge's voice was gentle but firm. Emma, take your time. There's no rush. Emma nodded, but her throat felt dry and the words stuck. She glanced toward the seats where Miss Roberts and Nora sat. Miss Roberts gave her an encouraging nod and Nora mouthed, "You can do it." Taking a deep breath, Emma began. "They're lying," she said, her voice trembling but clear. "They don't care about me, not really. At home it's not like how they act here." Carl immediately leaned forward in his seat. "That's not true." "Mr. Miller," the judge interrupted sharply, raising a hand. "You will remain silent while the witness speaks." Carl sat back, his jaw tight, but the glare he shot Emma sent a chill down her spine. "They yell at me all the time," Emma continued, her voice wavering. "They say I'm worthless and that I'm lucky to be with them." Carl grabbed my arm when he got mad. He left a mark. Emma pushed up her sleeve to show the faint bruise. And they only care about the money they get for taking care of me. I heard Carl say it on the phone. He laughed about it. The courtroom grew quieter with each word Emma spoke. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her old phone, which Miss Roberts had helped her prepare as evidence. Her hands shook as she passed it to the bailiff. There are recordings on there, Emma said, of them yelling. And I took pictures of the bruises and the papers I found in Carl's office. They've been spending the foster care money on themselves. The bailiff handed the phone to the judge, who listened to one of the recordings through headphones. Her expression darkened. The room was silent except for the faint sound of Carl's voice captured in one of his tirades. When the judge finally removed the headphones, her gaze was steely. Next, Nora took the stand. She sat confidently, her sharp eyes scanning the courtroom before she began. I've seen how Carl treats Emma, Nora said. He's rough and he talks to her like she's nothing. One time I saw him grab Emma's arm and drag her into the car. Emma looked scared, but Carl acted like nothing happened. And Emma told me how they only act nice when someone's watching. The judge nodded, making more notes. Nora glanced at Emma and gave her a small, reassuring smile as she stepped down from the stand. Finally, Miss Roberts presented her findings. She spoke with clarity and conviction, detailing the bruises she had noticed on Emma, her withdrawn behavior, and the financial discrepancies she had helped uncover. She handed the judge a thick report filled with her documentation, including statements from other teachers. Emma has shown incredible courage coming forward, Miss Roberts said. But she shouldn't have had to. The evidence speaks for itself. Carl and Linda have failed to provide a safe, supportive environment for this child. The judge leaned back in her chair, her face serious as she scanned the evidence. We'll take a short recess to deliberate, she announced, standing and leaving the room. Emma slumped back into her chair, exhaustion washing over her. Miss Roberts and Nora sat beside her, offering quiet reassurances. You did it, Nora said, her voice full of pride. You told the truth. That's what matters. Emma nodded, though her hands still trembled. The waiting was the hardest part, but she knew she had done everything she could. Now it was up to the court to decide her fate. The courtroom fell silent as the judge returned, her expression firm and unreadable. Emma's hands gripped the edge of the table, her heart pounding in her chest. Miss Roberts sat beside her, her presence steady and reassuring, while Nora gave her a small nod of encouragement. Across the room, Carl sat rigid, his jaw clenched, and Linda dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, her face a portrait of exaggerated grief. The judge cleared her throat and all eyes turned toward her. After reviewing the evidence, including testimony from Emma, Nora, and Miss Roberts, as well as the financial records and audio recordings presented, the court finds overwhelming evidence of neglect and financial fraud on the part of Carl and Linda Miller. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Carl's face turned red, his carefully constructed facade crumbling in real time. He opened his mouth as if to protest, but the judge raised a hand to silence him. Mr. Miller, she continued, her voice firm, you have not only failed in your duties as a foster parent but have also exploited the foster care system for personal gain. Your actions have caused significant harm to a child who trusted you for care and safety. The court cannot and will not overlook such egregious behavior. Carl shot to his feet, his voice shaking with anger. This is ridiculous. This kid is lying. We've done nothing but care for her. Sit down, Mr. Miller, the judge commanded, her tone icy. Carl hesitated but eventually dropped back into his chair, his fists clenched. The judge turned her attention to Linda, who was sobbing quietly, clutching Carl's arm. Mrs. Miller, your complicity in this matter is equally troubling. You enabled and participated in the neglect and financial misuse. While you may not have been the primary actor, your inaction and support of these actions make you equally responsible. Linda shook her head, her voice breaking. Please, Your Honor, I didn't mean. I was just trying to help. I didn't know it would go this far. Enough, the judge interrupted sharply. This is not a discussion. The evidence speaks for itself. She turned her gaze back to Carl. Effective immediately, Carl Miller, you are under arrest for child neglect and financial fraud. Bailiffs, please escort Mr. Miller into custody. Two bailiffs approached Carl, who looked as though he'd been struck. He stumbled backward, shouting, You can't do this. I have rights. But the bailiffs grabbed his arms and cuffed him, leading him toward the exit as Linda's sobs grew louder. Linda Miller, the judge continued, you will remain under investigation and are barred from fostering any children indefinitely. Your level of involvement will be determined in subsequent hearings. Linda collapsed into her chair, her cries echoing in the courtroom. Emma watched it all unfold, her emotions a tangled mess. She felt relief, yes, Carl and Linda could no longer hurt her, but she also felt a hollow ache, a reminder that once again she was losing a place she had tried, however unsuccessfully, to call home. As Carl was escorted out in handcuffs, Linda reached out toward Emma, tears streaming down her face. "Emma, please. I'm sorry. I didn't mean for it to be like this." Emma flinched, unsure how to respond. Miss Roberts placed a hand on her shoulder and leaned in. "You don't have to say anything," she whispered. The judge brought her gavel down, regaining the courtroom's attention. "In light of these findings, Emma will be reassigned to a new foster family. The Child Welfare Agency has been informed and will expedite the process to ensure her placement in a safe and supportive environment." Emma exhaled shakily, relief mingling with uncertainty. She looked at Miss Roberts, who gave her a small, reassuring smile. "This isn't the end, Emma," she said softly. "It's the beginning of something better." As the courtroom emptied, Emma remained in her seat, her hands gripping the edge of the table. The relief of knowing Carl and Linda could no longer hurt her was undeniable, but it wasn't as comforting as she had hoped. A familiar weight sat heavy in her chest, the uncertainty of what came next. She stared down at her hands, feeling both free and adrift. Miss Roberts stayed beside her, watching her closely. "You did so well today, Emma," she said, her voice soft but full of pride. "You were brave, and that's not easy. You should be proud of yourself." Emma nodded but didn't look up. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice small. She hesitated for a moment. "Well," she began carefully, "normally you'd be placed with another foster family while everything gets sorted out." Emma's shoulders sagged. "Another family," she murmured, almost to herself. She didn't need to say more. The weight of those words was clear. Miss Roberts leaned forward slightly, her tone growing quieter. "Emma, I've been thinking about this a lot. You've been through so much more than any kid should ever have to face, and through it all, you've shown so much strength. But I don't think you should have to keep starting over." She finally looked up at her, confused but curious. "What do you mean?" She offered her a tentative smile, her words careful but sincere. "What I mean is, how would you like to live with me?" "With you?" Emma's eyes widened, her breath catching in her throat. Miss Roberts nodded, her smile softening. "I know it's a big question and I don't expect you to answer right away. But I've been thinking about it a lot, and I'd really like to give you the kind of home you deserve. A real one." Emma's gaze dropped to the table, her heart pounding in her chest, a mix of disbelief and hope swirling inside her. "You really mean it?" she asked quietly. "I wouldn't say it if I didn't," she said, her voice steady. "I know I can't erase what you've been through, but I can make sure you don't have to go through it again. And I'd be lucky to have you as part of my family." Emma felt tears well up in her eyes. For so long she had convinced herself that no one really wanted her, that she was just another burden to be shuffled around. But Miss Roberts's words felt real, different. I think I'd like that," she said, her voice trembling. Miss Roberts reached out, placing a hand gently over hers. "Then let's make it happen," she said softly. "One step at a time." Emma stood hesitantly in the doorway of Miss Roberts's home, her backpack hanging loosely off her shoulder. The house was warm and inviting, with soft yellow walls and shelves filled with books and framed family photos. The scent of fresh-baked cookies filled the air. She caught sight of a girl with shoulder-length blonde hair stepping into the hallway. She looked about her age and wore a bright blue sweater that seemed to match her cheerful expression. "Hi there. You must be Emma," she said, extending her hand confidently. "I'm Grace, Miss Roberts's daughter." Emma stared for a moment before slowly shaking her hand. "Hi," she murmured. Grace smiled warmly. "Mom's been talking about you nonstop. Oh, and she baked cookies, chocolate chip her specialty. You're going to love them." Before Emma could respond, a man with sandy brown hair and a friendly demeanor appeared, drying his hands on a dish towel. "Welcome, Emma," he said, offering his hand. "I'm James, Grace's dad. Glad to have you here." Emma glanced at Miss Roberts, unsure of how to react. She gave her an encouraging nod. "Come on," she said gently. "Let me show you your room." The room was small but cozy, with light green walls and a soft bed covered in a patchwork quilt. A desk by the window and a small framed photo of Emma from school sat on the desk. She stared at it, unsure how it had made its way here. "I wanted it to feel like your space," Miss Roberts said softly, watching her. "If there's anything you'd like to add, just let me know." "It's nice," Emma murmured, setting her backpack on the bed. Grace leaned against the doorway with an easy grin. "Let me know if you need anything. Oh, and fair warning, Dad is way too competitive at board games, but I'm the reigning champion. From the hallway James called out, "She cheats. Don't trust her." Emma let out a small laugh, surprising herself. "I don't know how to play board games," she admitted. "No worries," Grace said. "We'll teach you." One evening after dinner, Miss Roberts joined Emma on the porch. The air was crisp and the stars shone brightly overhead. "How are you feeling?" she asked gently. "It's different," Emma said after a pause. "But it's not bad." Miss Roberts smiled. "Different can be good. And remember, you're part of this family now. We're here for you, me, Grace, and James. You don't have to do this alone." Emma nodded, her chest tightening with unfamiliar emotion. "Thanks," she said quietly. Later that night, as she lay in bed, Emma stared out the window at the stars. Her chest felt lighter, freer. "I am not scared of you anymore," she whispered into the darkness, her voice steady and clear. These were the 4 simple words that had stunned the courtroom earlier that day, the moment when Emma had looked directly at Carl during her testimony, her voice finding strength for all to hear. The house was quiet, filled with warmth and hope, and for the first time in a long time, Emma believed that maybe, just maybe, she'd found her place. Thanks for watching till the end. If you enjoyed the story, give this video a like. If you haven't already, subscribe for more inspiring stories of courage and justice. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments below.